My parents tried to give my inheritance to their golden child, but my grandparents did this. I always knew my parents loved my sister more than me. It wasn't a feeling. It wasn't paranoia. It was a fact, one that they never bothered to hide. From the moment I was born, I was second place. And my sister? She was everything to them. My father made his bias crystal clear when I was a kid. I remember my 5th birthday party. I got a store-bought cake and a quiet dinner at home. My sister, on the other hand, when she turned 2, she had a petting zoo, a professional magician, a full-on catered event like she was royalty. That was the pattern of our childhood. She got new clothes, the best toys, all the attention. Me? I got whatever was left over. It didn't stop at birthdays. It was school, achievements, everything. I joined the math club. No one cared. I got straight A's. No reaction. I won a regional science fair. Silence. But when my sister barely passed a test in high school, they took her out for a fancy dinner. They bought her a new phone as a reward. They told her they were so proud of her. And I just sat there, wondering what it would be like to matter to them. By the time I graduated high school, I had accepted the truth. I would never be their priority. They saw me as independent, self-sufficient, someone who didn't need them. But my sister? She was fragile, helpless, and incapable of doing anything alone. They worshipped her dependence. So when I got into an Ivy League school with a scholarship, I wasn't surprised when my father said, "That's good, but don't let it go to your head. Just remember who took care of you all these years." And then, within the same breath, "By the way, we're buying your sister a car for her graduation." I just nodded, because at that point, I had stopped expecting anything different. I left home at 18 and never looked back. I graduated with honors. I got a high-paying job in finance. By 27, I bought my first house. And my parents? They didn't care. Not once did they congratulate me. Not once did they acknowledge my success. Because to them, my life was less important than my sister's failures. But I didn't care. Because I had built something on my own. And I was finally free. Until my grandfather died. And suddenly, I was important again. Because for the first time in my life, I had something they wanted. My grandfather was the only family member who ever treated me fairly. He encouraged my dreams. He believed in me when my parents never did. He even said, "One day, you'll be the one taking care of yourself." And when he passed, his will reflected that belief. His entire estate was split equally among his children and grandchildren. That meant my sister and I got the same amount. My share? $500,000. Money that could pay off my student loans, help me invest in my future, maybe even start my own business someday. For the first time in my life, I had a financial head start. But my parents? They saw it differently. I should have known something was wrong when my father refused to look at me after the will was read. I should have been suspicious when my mother whispered something to my sister. But I didn't think much of it. Not until later that night, when they called me over for a private conversation. And the moment I sat down, they hit me with the most insane request I had ever heard. "You need to give your share to your sister." I stared at them, waiting for them to laugh, to tell me this was some stupid joke. But they just sat there, waiting, like this was the most normal thing in the world. My father leaned forward. "Your sister needs it more than you." I blinked. She got the same amount as me. My mother sighed, like I was being difficult. "Yes, but she's struggling. She lives in our basement. She works part-time at a coffee shop. She can't afford her own place." I raised an eyebrow. "And whose fault is that?" Silence. Then my father spoke, his voice low and stern. "It's not about fault. It's about doing what's right." I laughed, because suddenly, now they wanted to talk about morals. "I worked my ass off for years," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "And now that I finally have something, you want me to just hand it over?" My mother pursed her lips. "She needs it more." I shook my head. "No." That's when the guilt-tripping started. "We raised you. We gave you everything. You wouldn't even be where you are without us. She's your sister. How could you be so selfish?" But this time, I wasn't falling for it. I stood up and said the words that changed everything. "I'm keeping what's mine." Their faces twisted in rage. My father's jaw clenched. If you don't do this, you're going to regret it. My mother narrowed her eyes. You'll be turning your back on family. I crossed my arms. No, you turned your back on me a long time ago. Then, I walked out, and for a moment, I thought it was over. But I was wrong. Because my father? He wasn't going to take no for an answer. And what he did next was beyond unforgivable. I thought that was the end of it, that I had shut them down for good, that they would accept my decision and move on. But I should have known better. Because my father? He wasn't the type to take no for an answer. And what he did next was beyond unforgivable. It started with a phone call from my bank. There's been an unusual transaction on your account. A withdrawal attempt for the full amount of your inheritance. Did you authorize this? I felt my stomach drop. No, I said, my voice shaking. I didn't. I already knew who was behind it. And when I checked my account, I saw the name on the transfer request. My father. I drove straight to their house, my blood boiling. I didn't knock. I didn't wait. I stormed inside, slamming the door behind me. My father was in the kitchen, looking up from his coffee like he hadn't just tried to steal $500,000 from me. I held up my phone. Explain this. He sighed. You weren't supposed to find out so soon. I almost laughed. Like that was the problem. Not that he tried to rob me. Not that he had betrayed me completely, but that I had found out too early. I clenched my fists. You stole from me. He didn't even flinch. It was for your sister. I exhaled sharply. So, what? You just thought I wouldn't notice? He shrugged. You don't need it as much as she does. That was it. That was his excuse. Like my money was a family resource, something he could just redistribute as he pleased. Like I wasn't even a person, just an ATM for Erica. I felt my heart pounding in my chest. And then, my mother walked in, and instead of looking guilty, she actually looked annoyed. Oh, come on, she sighed. It's not like you were using it. I blinked. Are you serious? She waved a hand. You'll make that back in no time. But your sister? She needs help. I let out a harsh, bitter laugh. Because this was insanity. I took a deep breath. Then, slowly, deliberately, I said, you have exactly 1 hour to put the money back, or I'm calling the police. My father stiffened. You wouldn't. I met his eyes. Oh, I absolutely would. They tried everything to change my mind. Guilt-tripping, yelling, after everything we've done for you. But I didn't budge. Because this was the final straw. They had always chosen her over me. But now, they had crossed into criminal territory, and I wasn't about to let it slide. In the end, my father had no choice. He transferred the money back, but before I left, he looked me dead in the eye and said, You just made a mistake you can't take back. I smiled. No, the mistake was ever trusting you in the first place. Then, I walked out, and I never looked back. I changed everything after that, closed all joint accounts, locked down my credit, filed a fraud alert against them, and when my father called me a week later, I let it go to voicemail. His message was pathetic. You overreacted. You're tearing this family apart. You need to make this right. I laughed, because for once, I wasn't the one who needed to fix anything. They were. But by the time they realized that, it was already too late, because I was done. Forever. I thought that was it. That once I got my money back and cut them off, they would finally leave me alone. But I should have known better. Because people like my parents, they don't accept defeat. They double down. A week later, I came home from work to find someone waiting for me. Sitting outside my apartment building, looking furious and impatient, was my mother. The second she saw me, she stood up and stormed toward me. You need to fix this, she hissed. I stared at her. Fix what? She threw her hands up. This mess. Your father's furious. Your sister is devastated. And now the whole family is talking about what a selfish, ungrateful daughter you are. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Good, I said. Maybe now they'll finally see you for who you really are. Her face twisted in anger. We raised you. We gave you everything. And this is how you repay us? I crossed my arms. Everything? I repeated. You mean the years of neglect? The blatant favoritism? The way you tried to steal my inheritance? Is that the everything you're talking about? Her jaw tightened. Your sister is struggling, she said, her voice sharp. She deserves that money more than you. I tilted my head. And whose fault is that? Silence. For the first time, my mother didn't have a response. Because she knew. She knew that Erica had every opportunity to succeed, and she chose to fail. But instead of accepting that, my parents had spent their entire lives shielding her from consequences. And now, they wanted me to do the same. I smiled. Not my problem. That's when she snapped. You are heartless, she spat. You are cruel. You are going to regret this one day. I raised an eyebrow. Funny. That's exactly what Dad said after he tried to steal my money. Her eyes flashed with something ugly. And then, she pulled out her final weapon. If you don't make this right, she whispered, we will take legal action. I actually laughed. Oh, please, I scoffed. What are you going to sue me for? Not letting you rob me. She lifted her chin, trying to look confident. We can claim you manipulated Grandpa into giving you that inheritance, that you coerced him in his final days. I stared at her, because this was insanity. They were willing to lie under oath just to get their hands on my money. And the worst part? I wasn't even surprised. I took a slow step forward, lowering my voice. Do it. She blinked. What? I smirked. Go ahead. Try it. File the lawsuit. She faltered. You think I won't? I tilted my head. I think the moment you do, my lawyer will have a field day dragging you and Dad through court for fraud, attempted theft, and financial manipulation. Her breath hitched. Because she knew. She knew they had no case. She knew that if they went to court, all they would do was expose themselves. And finally, for the first time in my life, she looked afraid of me. I leaned in, voice calm and final. You have two options. 1. You walk away and never contact me again. Her hands shook. And 2, she whispered. I smiled. You try to fight me, and I destroy you. Silence. Then, she turned and walked away. And just like that, I knew. I had one. That was the last time I ever saw my mother. She and my father never sued. Erica never got my money. I never looked back. And for the first time in my life, I was free. But what I didn't expect was the final twist that came months later. Because while I had moved on, my parents had just dug their own graves. I thought I had seen the worst of them, that after my mother's empty threats, after my father's failed theft, after their final pathetic attempt to sue me, they would finally disappear. That they would realize I was no longer their punching bag. But I should have known. People like my parents, they don't just give up. They self-destruct. And I was about to watch it all happen in real time. 3 months after I cut them off, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to pick up. And when I did, a familiar voice greeted me. Erica, I sighed, already exhausted. What do you want? She hesitated. For the first time in forever, she didn't sound smug or entitled. She sounded desperate. Mom and Dad are in trouble, she said. I blinked. And then, I laughed. Yeah? And that's my problem because... She exhaled sharply. Look, I know you hate them, but you need to hear me out. I stayed silent, waiting, because if they were finally facing consequences for their actions, I wanted to hear every detail. She hesitated. Then, they tried to take out a loan. I raised an eyebrow. And they used your name. My blood turned to ice. I clenched the phone tighter. What did you just say? She swallowed. They tried to take out a loan using your name. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Because this wasn't just pathetic desperation. This was fraud, identity theft, a crime. And the best part? They got caught. The bank flagged it, Erica continued. Apparently, because you already had that fraud alert on your accounts, they knew something was off. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. So the one smart decision I made months ago had just saved me from another disaster. Unbelievable. I shook my head. So what happened next? She sighed. They got reported. To the police. I froze. Then, I smiled. My parents had always thought they were untouchable. That they could lie, manipulate, and take whatever they wanted without consequence. And now, They were finally paying the price. But Erica? She still didn't get it. You need to help them, she said. I almost choked. I burst out laughing, actually doubling over from the absurdity of it. Help them? I repeated. Are you out of your damn mind? She snapped. They're facing charges, Madison. Do you even care? They could lose everything. I shrugged. They should have thought about that before trying to steal my identity. For the first time, Erica cracked. They're our parents, she whispered. I shook my head. No, they were your parents. She sucked in a breath. But I wasn't done. Because let's be real, Erica. They never cared about me. They only cared about you. And now that they've screwed themselves over, you actually expect me to bail them out? She didn't answer. Because we both knew the truth. Then, softly, she said, they need money for a lawyer. I grinned. Oh, that's just beautiful. She hesitated. What? You think I'm going to fund their legal defense? I chuckled darkly. I hope they rot in jail. Her voice broke. You're a monster. I tilted my head. No, I just finally learned to stop caring. And then, I hung up. For the last time. A week later, I got an update. My parents were officially charged with identity theft and attempted fraud. They had no money for a lawyer. They were on their own. And me? I went on with my life. Without them. Without guilt. Without regret. Because for the first time, I was truly, completely free. I didn't reach out. I didn't check in. I didn't even pretend to care. Because my parents? They weren't my problem anymore. For the first time in my life, I had no obligation to them. And I was done pretending otherwise. But Erica? She wasn't ready to accept reality. Which is why, 1 week after our last conversation, she showed up at my apartment. I opened the door to find her standing there, looking exhausted, pale, and, for the first time ever, completely lost. She didn't storm in. She didn't start yelling. She just stood there, like a child who had just realized that her parents weren't invincible. Please, she whispered. I crossed my arms. Why are you here? She exhaled shakily. They're really going to jail. I stared at her, waiting for the real reason she was here. And sure enough, she finally said it. I need your help. I smirked. Help? I repeated. Help with what? She swallowed. I can't do this alone. Mom and Dad are gone, I finished. They did this to themselves. She clenched her jaw. You could have stopped this. I raised an eyebrow. No, they could have stopped this. The second they decided to steal from me. Her eyes burned with frustration. This isn't fair. I laughed. Oh, but it is. I took a step forward, lowering my voice. You had everything growing up, Erica. Their love, their attention, their support. And what did I have? She stayed silent. I smirked. Nothing. I let the words hang between us. Then, I closed the door in her face. No more second chances. No more guilt. Just silence. And it was beautiful. Weeks passed. Then months. And just like that, they were gone. My parents were sentenced for fraud. Their lives fell apart. Erica? She was on her own. And me? For the first time? I didn't care. Because I had one. And I wouldn't change a thing.